today with us and introduce to you all Lingfei Wu from the University of Pittsburgh. Ling is someone who I've got to know better and better as we've had conversations over a joint project over about the last year, introduced by our postdoc Penny Mealy. And what becomes immediately apparent and to me, and when we were talking, is Ling's fascination for knowledge, for innovation, for science, and talking about these things, probably to the frustration of co-authors watching Ling, maybe, and I ask too many questions of each other and try to work out what each other thinks about things. But it's been my privilege to hear Ling talk about them. And this fascination spilled over into his outlets such as PNAS and Nature. And he's really trying to understand, I think, in a deep way, fascinating things about, like, what's the shape of science? What's the topology? What's the contours of the landscape that we search within when we do knowledge creation? And how does it work? What's the process of formation of knowledge, individually and particularly in teams? And this sort of comes under the broad heading of the science of science. And it's something that I think as scientists, we're all pretty interested in because it allows us for a moment to abstract from our particular domains, look above and think beyond these meta questions that drive us. And many of us come to science in the first place with that initial curiosity and fascination. Ling's also somewhat of an athlete. He really likes the look and feel of things. He wants the scientific communication to be just so that people understand what's being communicated in a deep way, to see the world as he sees it. So I think taking all that together, we're in for a treat. The paper he's brought today is knowledge production scalable? Understanding tacit knowledge in innovation. And just on your comments and questions, Ling would like to speak for about 40 minutes, and then he's going to have 20 minutes at the end for discussion. So if you want to put things in the chat, you can, but that will be somewhat of a way of perhaps ordering our conversation in the discussion point. Thanks, Ling. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. That's a better summary than I can deliver for myself. So I really appreciate that, and I appreciate this opportunity to Soda Labs. That I hear is a very diverse people from different disciplines, and that's a science I believe. Then when we go across the borders of our own comfort zone, that we really see ourselves better. Okay, so today I'd like to share and invite you to think together of one of the biggest questions I've been indulging myself for years. That is knowledge production in general term, or like science and technological innovation in more specific terms, are they scalable? And the future layout ahead of us is really nice if we think about how science, how technology, especially the communication technology, has advanced in the past decade, right? We move information very fast now. We have all these fascinating platforms. We have Twitter, we have Facebook. Some may not like them as much as Wikipedia, but the bottom line is that we have so many large online knowledge markets, and appear to us that knowledge is producing every second. And it looks like things are scaling up very quickly, and leading us to the fascinating, promising future that we can just scale up what society already knows, things which is advanced, and it's all about good news here and there. But then, like, I think it will helpful for us to dive a little bit out of that optimism and think about what are the factors underlying this kind of promise. And one instant hunch we'll have is that the question we ask, can we scale up knowledge? Can we scale up what collectively we know? Is really depends on how collectively we think, right? That's and is that fast or slow or progress? And how are we going to act better on that progress? Really depends on many different things. And for example, any of us have a decent exposure to the science and technology as a computer system for a while. Like if you are a graduate student, you have been working on your paper for a while. If you are a researcher or faculty member, you have been dealing with even more complicated system that always involves teams, right? You need to think about who to work together and how do team members complement each other. You need to think about budget. From the PhD, you need to think about how much time you can deliver, what kind of work. From as a faculty, it's more complicated. You typically dance between different kind of teams and think about budgets or all the same. And there are a lot of other numbers you also need to think about. Office, available computation resource. All these things are really tightly coupled. And when we talk about knowledge, we are talking about this kind of complex scaffold that we try to dance upon and try to deliver knowledge. And the more we got exposure to the science as a system and technology research as a system, the less we are naive about the idea that science will just evolve by itself. When you write down a few equations, these equations will automatically calculate only by your push, and they will generate more beautiful equations, right? So this is how the reality look like. And I would like to express this reality in this question as what is the complexity in science and technology landscape really like? Imagine we have a landscape of ideas, right? Some of you may heard of the landscape of species in which you have a high dimension space and each dimension is like a feature of that space. Can you move fast? Are you weight heavy, or are you big or small? And all these biological features allow you to survive in evolution, which can be expressed as a landscape of fitness, right? Now, let's bring this survival of the fittest principle into the evolution of ideas. In every second, all of our society is coming up, all kind of voice, everyone is saying everything. And then now, what is the idea that will eventually survive after generations and across time and spaces? And more importantly, when we select these ideas collectively ourselves, and also we are also being selected as a society by the bigger universe, what kind of idea are favored by ourselves and by the universe? And what's the landscape like? Is it a smooth landscape that when you find every question, every answer will lead you to the next question and the next answer, that people just gradually converge to the ultimate truth? Or is there really a scattered, rugged landscape that the information collected by this team and the knowledge obtained by that team does not always map up? We are like traveling through a very rugged space. And this is an important question because the landscape of the idea look like and the complexity it has really determine what is the optimal strategy as a society to move forward, right? If it's really a smooth landscape, then we should really have large things. We have to have a very connected society so that we have that kind of back propagation of learning each other's errors, and then we move toward one direction, right? Like sometimes we said in other contexts, a big world, a different countries, but we have one dream, right? Or alternative possible universe that we could have been living in is really a rugged place. In this place, scattered teams, individual thinkers, and small teams, they are probably have that kind of advantage of not be affected by others, of not be controlled by others. And then the parallel computing kind of search will probably be more fruitful than collective, than sequential computing, in which you build on each other's ideas in terms of identifying great solutions for society, right? So this is the big picture, and around that big picture, I've been spending a couple of years, and today I'd like to bring a few findings to you, and we have an authentic and honest discussion on many of these topics. And just a little bit more of introduction of not just what I think, but what kind of community and institutional landscape I'll place myself in, I'll define myself as belonging to the increasingly expanding community of the science of science, in which people really come across from meet together from different disciplines to think about how science advance can be measured, can be evaluated, and how we can recognize and cultivate more innovations. And also this is, of course, related to the representation, understanding, and modeling of the knowledge itself in one hand, and really relate to a lot of policy thinkings from the more conventional scientometrics and informatics community. So that's the landscape of community that you may find helpful to reach out to find more people like care about these kind of questions. And for teaching and research, I base on the institution of University of Pittsburgh Information Science Department. We have a long, actually longer name than that, but I'll just, for easier to remember, I'll just say information science. And these figures are select from one of the book that I wrote called Information Visualization in Social Science. And I also used that book to teach information visualization. So this is really, I really got keen and fascinating on how beautifully science and data can be expressed. So now back to our question: what is the knowledge look like? And especially, I got exposure to a lot of like the social dimensions of knowledge, in which the insight I provide is that knowledge does not just produce and store and move and act within one single brain. It's really a lot of many brains, and you put them together, right? So measuring knowledge in all kinds of online knowledge markets, including question and answer online communities, as a typical example, has been my years of exploration. And I have been looking through all these kind of systems, web forums, social network sites, question answering communities, and online social programming sites like GitHub. And all this previous exploration leads to some very interesting universal pattern that that is called superlinear scaling of knowledge. Now let's define at this stage. Let's define knowledge in a very naive way. Let's assume every second when you set up a friendship linkage with your people on the networking sites, whenever you tweet something, whenever you comment a photo, whenever you share a tag, it's all about knowledge creation, right? And one naive assumption is that the people will have a representative, typical behavior in sharing knowledge and creating knowledge, so that a total volume of knowledge from the online market will increase linearly with the population that is active. But again, we confirm this observation that it's always superlinear, which means that in the larger, more densely connected communities, you are always expect, or actually you contribute more than you are in smaller communities, right? So it's really reflecting accelerating speed in online, in virtual life, in knowledge creation, and explains a lot of why these communities emerge and expand themselves. It's called scale economies in economics, and explains a lot of why there's emergence of all kind of economic organizations, cities, companies, even countries, right? So this is like a very universal pattern that I indulge myself with many years, again and again, to think about these patterns, to confirm these patterns, eventually to mathematically model these patterns. But this and a little bit unfold on this direction, if you are interested, this is related to another stream of research created by Louis Bennecourt, Geoffrey West, and others which they really talk a lot about scale economics in cities. That explains a lot why there are cities, right? When you get it together, you create more wealth, innovation, and you save the cost of the shared road and gas and everything, right? So in this way, you can basically understand online communities and knowledge markets as virtual cities in which people create things through interaction. But then, like, this is not really the focus of today's talk. Today, I would like to really leverage this time to talk about apparently a twist of their understanding. The previous understanding was like, it's always scale, things are scalable. It's always scale economies. When we get together, we are better. But a recent paper published in 2019 by me and two collaborators really try to go beyond that. And first of all, by looking at what kind of teams are optimal in creating radically new ideas, and then come back of thinking, what do we mean by new ideas? And how is that reconciled with our previous understanding of scalable things, right? So this is a little bit spoiler alert. It's really about knowledge scale these economies in knowledge. And to do this research, we really did a very extensive data analysis. We collect 65 million teams from science, technology, and software development. We collect their metadata, including team size and contents and identities of these contributors, link them to the flow of knowledge as a reference network in which all papers cite previous papers, all patterns cite previous patterns, and all GitHub projects cite benefit from previous influenced by previous GitHub projects, right? It's like a river of knowledge, and knowledge evolves through time. And you ask the question of what's the role of contribution of that single work in the river of knowledge. So basically, the background, the stage of this conversation that has been pushed forward by other scholars in this field for decades. That's like it's a lot of effort, but the voice they celebrate really feels very simple. It's all about big things, better, right? And there were a couple of field definitive work in Science and Nature about the increasing dominance of big things in all areas. And this, there's no deny that these are important empirical observations. But then, like when you ask the question is how big is enough for the team? The answer is like always bigger. And I use the right figure to show sometimes the reality that we try to make up big teams to apply grants, to write papers with actual very small active people really doing the real work, right? So this is a part of the reality that hasn't been well described, and that's the appearance. That's the thing we want to reflect upon, right? So one example to understand this is really think about the actual teams in science. So one of the biggest things in science that involves 1,000 or more people, I literally count the number of the people, authors in the paper, is indeed 1,000 and beyond. And lasts for decades, and probably one of the most expensive science project that US has ever supported is the gravitational wave project, right? There's no deny this is a big success, that we eventually find something that Einstein, which is a very small thing, that's one single author predict 100 years ago. And very interesting thing is that if you think about the history of how this scientific advance was made, and you try to hook up these kind of losers that got buried in the dust of history, you remember people like Joseph Weber, who invented the Weber bar, try to measure that kind of things in 60s and failed because he didn't have enough money to make a bigger bar or a more sensitive bar. And you realize that sometimes there are indeed some part of science that cannot be delivered by small teams, right? There's no way you can ask either Einstein or Weber to deliver the kind of measurement of gravitational wave, use a very small team, use a very tight budget, right? So that's what big teams are for. Big teams are for big science. But the question now is every science big science? Can we afford to have only big science, right? And where does big science come from? Well, in the case of Einstein and the gravitational wave, we know it comes from small science, from the single people, from a small or another single people with a small team that failed. And it's this kind of tons of crazy attempts, creative ideas, and unfortunate fails that piled up to build things that big teams can develop upon, right? So the success of a big science, of success of big teams is upon a pile of failure of many small people and small teams. That's the picture we see, and that's the picture we feel that is undertold by previous studies. So in this way, we really want to differentiate two kinds of activity in science, which is underappreciated in previous measures, because previous measures is all about citation. Well, citation is something we know more for sure now. It's something favors the past, not the future, right? If you have more citation, you are easier to gain even more citation. It's called Matthews effect in science. Now, citation is more to celebrate exploration, exploitation, because you already you try to explore or exploit, better put it in that way, a mature media attention market, right? You exploit things that people already know so that people can cite your things. It's really about the relevance. You make it relevant so people see the relevance and they will cite you. It's really about the conform of what has already been told in science. It's really about displaying yourself so you have a community, right? Oh, I'm an economics. I'm going to write an equation in this way because that's what we do. It's really about the succession, right? Not really the rebuilding of in the public of science. So all these things celebrated by science citations and acknowledge previous scientific measures in the science is really about establishment. It's really about the very convention, very about conforming. And we really are interested in developing another kind of things to measure the reverse force, right? How people can explore and disagree and rebel on things, right? So we notice that it is two different kind of force. Well, looking at a lot of millions of teams from each of these domains and really analyzing the data, we define a way to measure how things can be different, right? So there are two directions we can capture. Eventually we call that disruption index, right? So this index varies from +1 to -1 because it's really a subtraction between two probabilities. And the probability of in the green color is that if you look at the focal paper, the contribution of the focal paper as showed in the blue diamonds in the middle, and how it built upon previous work as the gray circles, and how it's cited by future work illustrated by the green and red rectangles. So this is like, what's your role in the river of knowledge in human history, right? So there are really different kind of contribution, although that you can really have the same amount of citation, right? So one extreme is that you really, the future work on the right side, on the green side, the future work only cite you, but not your reference. On the other end, every future work that cite you will cite your reference, which indicates that you are really not creating something radically new, but really point the attention from future to the past, right? So you are connector. You connect future to the past. You are not expander, disruptor. You didn't create new things and shift the path of science that should have been moving forward, right? So this is a very different kind of force. And two examples we put here is on the right side, the same pile model. One of my favorite model in physics. It comes from statistical physics, but then it creates a field of self-organized collegiality, and in general becomes one of founding papers in compact systems, right? On the right side, on the left side, it's also a very good paper. That paper is so good that it wins the author a Nobel Prize award, and by Davis and the team and the co-workers in first observation of Einstein-Bose condensed matter prediction in the lab, right? So the left side is observation of a gray theory. The right side is the creation of the gray theory itself. They both publish on Physical Review Letters, a prestige physics journal. They both cite by 6,000 or more, well cited, but they are so different in the contribution to the river of science, right? So that's the kind of thing we want to capture. We also validate this measure in multiple different ways, including analyzing the contents, like the keywords, how these different measures capture. Like when you have keywords like change, introduce, advance, then it's really about disruptive work. When you have keywords in the title and abstract about endorse, confirm, demonstrate, it's really about the kind of activity that support the previous work, right? So after we confirm this, we're trying to indulge ourselves again to do a little bit art. This is just like one way we, as scientists, entertain ourselves. So the right side shows these two works, the SunPile model and the condensed matter, condensed matter model, right? So here I try to do a little bit art. I put the focal work as the at the year in the year of the publication, as still as the blue rectangle, blue diamond, and then like you have future papers that cite you, and if the future paper cite you, also cite your reference, which is your roots, I will curve it down, show that it's like a gravity towards the past. You know, you bring the future thinking towards the past. And if the future paper only cite you, but not your roots, your intellectual depth, then it's really curved up, and I will color it as green. So it's really, you create a new tree in science. So in this way, you can capture very different kind of work in science, all the way from negative to positive disruption. And now this is when we establish the measure, when we play after we play around with the illustration to get more confidence about the measure, it's really nice. It's really the time to bring the big picture in, right? So we first of all we look at the after left part of the slides. We really tested on the science data set with millions of teams, and we found that when you have a larger teams, you always are more likely to have expectation of citation, so you are more likely to be cited, and so the indicate by increase of the red line, but then you are less likely to be to create a new direction, to disrupt the convention, right? Indicated by the percentile decrease of the green line. So I capture one way to understand these two kind of things on the left, small thing, and the right, large thing, is really about, are you eclipsing the past ideas by creating something new? Are you really broadcasting the past idea to a bigger world? Right? They're two very different kind of things. And on the top panel, we look at the average, and the lower panel, we look at the extreme values. The same story still holds. And in the first column, we look at the science, and the second and third column, we look at the patterns and the software projects. And again, the same story still holds. Now, some of you may have a question. So what is the optimal team size? How large is a large team that's too big to innovate? Or how small is a small team to be innovative? The answer is really, it doesn't matter. It's really a continuous trend, as we can already see here. Although personally, I like three or less team as a more extreme small team definition. But really, the transition is continuous over the whole spectrum. Basically, we found that each additional team member will make the team less disruptive in general. And we run a robustly test across different dimensions. It does not change with levels of citations or like levels of popularity. It does not change across disciplines, although there are indeed some disciplines that are easier to disrupt, like computer science and sociology, lend some other disciplines are harder to disrupt, like physical science. That's where we should assume that's the different nature of knowledge, which is artificial created knowledge versus nature science. The difference comes in. But the same story holds. And the same story even holds when you do the fixed effect model in frequently used in economics. That is not by doing this model, we really control the same people and observe if the same people move between small and large things, the effect still observed. And we confirm that this is really about the social mechanism in which that people act in large teams will think more like large team guys rather than different kind of people, like there are more creative people like to gather in small teams. So it's not about people. It's not about different kind of people, different kind of scientists, but different kind of ways that science can be done. So these are all, again, we look at a general level, it's the same story still holds. And we try to model the content in a better way. We try to capture the content, not just by the expert-driven, different categories of fields, but really modern data-driven ways of measuring, capturing the contents, use neural network-based embeddings, and the same story still holds. Now, a little bit extension of this story will show us that there's actually, this is not a trivial phenomenon. There are actually most like a bigger picture behind that, social dimensions, social mechanism of how things happen in science, right? So now imagine you are really an investor sitting in an office in Hollywood, right? This was created by last year, this size. So imagine there's a guy come to you and want you to invest on a movie called Crazy Rich Asian. And the last time there was an all Asian cast movie in Hollywood was 8 years ago. And it was never a good success, right? Now, alternative, there's another director when you invest the director's Transformer 8 or whatever now the latest version. You know it sucks. You know what Transformer 8 is going about. It's going about a lot of big machines and fighting each other and a lot of classic things you can predict. But which movie you are going to invest if you have $1 million, right? And which movie you are going to invest if you have $10 million, even more? Or which movie you are going to invest if you have only $1,000? So, so one possibility is really that if you with the more resource at hand and with a bigger team you are responsible for, you really are not really not aware of all the crazy ideas happening, but really a constraints of your action, not your thinking, right? You have to pick the safe choice. One of the suggestive evidence towards this direction is really about when we found that when we have small teams on the left hand, you try to search earlier work measured by the distance of your reference, the temporal distance, right? And try to discover smaller work, like less popular work that you build upon. And when you have larger teams, you really search about recent hotspots that's recently published and published well and get a lot of attention already, like Transformer 5, right? So it's really about different logic we try of behavior we try to put out here. And so this is how you build your work connected to the past. And this the way you connect to the past will also determine or influence at least the way you survive to the future, right? And there's something called the Sleeping Beauty Index, which measures to how long your paper will sleep and aware of, and whether it has a second chance of being awakened. And the larger the index, you basically have a second wave of attention. And we also find that the larger teams, as the smaller teams, are more likely to have create this kind of sleeping beauty effect, right? So connecting the past to the future, one very romantic way to summarize is that people or teens try to remember will be remembered, and people try to forget by forgetting about the earlier work and try to only remember what's happened recently, try to have a short memory, they will be forget soon. Okay? So that's a very poetic way to look at that. Now, there are ongoing work to look at what's really the mechanism about that. Is really a story of capitalism. Is it because of large teams really have, as we discussed in the example of a Hollywood investor, right? It's a more to lose and less to gain. And we also find the suggestive evidence from that paper already that the teams that found it are actually less likely to innovate than the teams that are not found it working on the same topic published on the same journal, right? So this point of the question, what kind of teams are we founding in science? And or is it really also about the communication cost? And what is creating the communication cost? Well, a little bit spoiler alert again, that's probably about the hidden knowledge that we cannot easily communicate with each other, right? So different kind of teams. I work in a big paper factory. There's a big brain that controls many aggressively defined muscle or graduate students that try to do 10 or 100 papers at the same time, versus you really have a very engaging team and everyone is trying to do everything in the team that looks like the structure of mesas, right? These two different kind of team structure I expect to bring different kind of creativity in science. And this really, I would like to acknowledge a little bit. I mentioned the credit of my two collaborators on the same paper, which also defined really lived my career. That's James Evans from the sociology department at U Chicago, and that's the one from the School of Kellogg School of Management in Northwestern. And in below, I try to visualize our conversations, all the emails, communication on this topic, single topic, over 3.5 years. It's really a small thing over a very engaging, long conversation. Now, what's the big idea? If I may invite you to think about this again. If I may remind, we will talk about how knowledge can scale up and how knowledge cannot scale up, as we just said, right? So one very aggressive way to look at that is like, are more people have better ideas in science or in beyond, right? And a recent paper, a recent review article on the Science of Science led by Santo Fernando in 2018 published on Science, point out these two different perspectives of science, right? On the left side, we see the exponential increase of articles every year. It is so promising. But on the right side, if you look at the keywords created by these articles, it's really just linear expanding. Science is not increased as much as fast as we can, and science cannot be scaled up as good as we may expect, right? So one of the hidden mechanisms here is really like when we talk about knowledge production and when we talk about ideas, are we talking about like mediocre ideas? Are we talking about all ideas in which a majority of which is really just repeat each other and do like this kind of incremental, smaller, tiny edits to each other? Or really, are we really talk about a radical idea that will shift the direction of science, and that kind of idea had to base upon and digest a lot of other ideas? So that is the main question we had. And we have some other research opportunity going on to uncover this kind of myth of the hidden complexity of the complexity of hidden idea landscape. And one of the final thing I want to mention is the ongoing conversation with, well, it's beyond conversation, is really a lot of exciting findings that emerging joined together with work with Penny and Simon, excellent collaborators. And what we are still trying to put out the story here. And one possible thing I think see the connection I would like to invite you to think together is really about the social dimension of text knowledge that cannot be moved around, right? Unfortunately, we don't have time to unfold the text knowledge today, but basically you can understand it as a hidden technological or scientific know-hows that we cannot, as the first pioneer, a scholar in this field, Polanyi mentioned, we believe more than we can prove. and we know more than we can say, right? There are things cannot be easily translated into explicit knowledge. And one of these applications in the workplace is that how easily can you move between jobs? It really depends on many other things. Even you already have two jobs that very similar in content, in skills, in the formal definition. They probably defined in very different way in reality. And one of many things that differentiate them and create a gap that prevent people moving across is really the social perceptions of that job. If a job is perceived to be a very male dominant, like a doctor, a very white dominant, a very there are other social perceptions of that kind of things comes in. Even you have that kind of skill, it'll be very hard for you to move. And these are just one of many examples of why teams cannot easily just scale up, and why people cannot just move across countries, move between jobs, and why countries cannot just making banana yesterday and making chips and rocket science tomorrow. So I will just stop here to make sure we have enough time for discussion. Thank you for your attention already.
Thanks so much, Ling. I'm sure there's going to be some good discussion. Vilam has already put one in the chat, which Vilam, if you want to speak to it, he asks basically about the part of the new technology being able to get individualized and therefore potentially much more efficiently exposed to findings in science in a way that we couldn't have done before. And that could be a potential structural break in the way that we think of our scientific progress. Vilam, did you want to add to that?
Probably not much, I think, but say when I type this question, right, Lingfei, you haven't talked about the tacit knowledge aspect. Then one thing that sort of also come up in my mind is that, say, for example, right, one thing I've learned, say, like with the lockdown, right. On the other hand, I lost opportunity to visit my co-authors and then talk to him in person, and a lot of, say, like deep level communication by partly convey the tacit knowledge, which is not possible without personal interaction. But on the other hand, right, I can actually record we can record Zoom discussion, and then it becomes a lot easier for us to check some ideas or say some thought that we had that we would not otherwise be able to. So overall, I just see a lot of these things happening, right? Just want to know how you think about whether or not there will be some kind of structural break in the whole process.
Ling, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I see. One of these questions are very fascinating, and just want to make sure I summarize the question right. So you are saying, what's the real barriers? What's the real cost happening? Why things cannot scale up? Why things like does not scale with additional team members? And is it because of the complex idea that we cannot move across members through distance? Like if we only do this kind of online communication, there are certain kind of threshold of complexity that kill the most complex ideas. Did I get your question right?
That's actually sorry, the secondary question. I think the main question tie up is this individualized update services, right? For example, say for some many professional organizations like American Psychological Association, now you can subscribe to their service. I mentioned cooperation, conflict, and empathy. Then they will send me update about the article published, right, by the association, and so in different journal to me, right? And also say Elsevier Science, right? For example, right, if you go to Science Direct, then they actually have a very powerful search engine. You can search, say, I can put in empathy, right? Then they will show me all the articles published by Elsevier, right, in the database. But right, that creates a problem, right? For example, right, maybe they can actually induce me to mainly cite and look at, say, journals, right, in the database, all these things. I'm just saying that, say, like, I mean, just a bit like, well, what Sunstein is concerned for this echo chamber effect, right, in social media communication. It's the same thing that are we scholar community, are we also affected so much by a lot of this fascinating individualized information, update information, very useful. but are they also in some sense create some kind of a small bubble across communication, right? And it so affect the trade-off between exploitation and exploration, right? Say, and also say for example, Google Scholar recommend, right? There's a time dimension, right? You recommend papers that I recently read or say things like that based on my current interest, but will meet my maybe some long interest in my mind that say are not active for a while, things like that. Yeah. Sorry, sorry, too broad maybe the question.
No, this is not broad at all. This is I see your point now. You're basically talking about the information cocoon in the context of science, right? And your question is like, when we are celebrating these individual innovators and small teams, are we actually celebrating people who got stuck by these recommendation engines? Because you are saying that, if I understand your rights, this is a very, very valuable question. You're saying that we already live in a time that we can easily get stuck with our own ideas that are amplified by machines. It's pretty much like how people's ideology amplified on social media. And our idea is amplified by information technologies that facilitate science, right? Because you search by keywords and everything. Now, if this is the landscape, why we are still celebrating small teams? Why we shouldn't not connect each other so we see the bigger, broader world? Is that so? Did I get your question finally right?
That doesn't matter. I just want to listen to what you said. Yeah.
Yeah. Here's just one way that I interpret that. I hope I interpret it right. I agree with you in the sense that information technology may lock people down in a small niche of thinking. And one of the reference is published by my collaborator, James Evans, that I just mentioned in Science. It's called, if you search his name, you'll find it in Science. He basically talk about the dangers of digitally archived papers that will, because the easier search will get people stuck. So I agree with you, that could be one of many consequences of technology. But this is a big topic. We probably don't have enough time to unfold every dimension here. But I want to mention another dimension to think. That is the team size for delivering work does not always equal to team size for thinking and digesting ideas. So one interesting book I would like to recommend is the Sociology of Philosophies by Randall Collins. In this book, he mentioned the great innovators are lonely, but they are lonely socially, but not lonely intellectually. So that's the two dimensions I want to specify. Intellectually, one can expose you to very big community, and you can only make great achievement when you exposure to this opportunity, this community, because you will know what's the important question to work on. And this does not conflict with some kind of socially loneliness that you have to deliver the work by yourself. So I think differentiating intellectual and social dimensions in academic life may be one way to complement the limitation you point out, which I totally agree.
Thanks, Ling. Klaus, I think one of your former office
Hey,
co-workers.
Klaus.
Hello, how are you?
Long time no see.
Long time to see, yes. I would have a bit different questions. So essentially, as a researcher, you actually have some influence how you cite them to increase the chance of your paper to become one of the disruptive ones. Is this correct, if I understand this correctly? Because if I don't cite all the history all the time, but only cite the recent papers, don't I then increase my likelihoods to be considered be one of these papers who will have a high impact?
So again, you say like if you cite the recent work, you are more likely to gain a citation, which I totally agree.
Yeah, because I don't I don't cite the old ones, and that's actually kind of that's a strategy as a researcher you could use. It might not be ethical, yeah, but that's actually a strategy you could use.
Well, I'm pretty sure it's also ethical.
Okay. Yeah.
So I think Klaus is worried about gaming the system. So suppose that your new disruptive index became adopted, and we saw these slides, someone saw the presentation and thought, oh, I see. I will get a higher disruption index if I make sure that I try and edge my ratio towards my site and small community rather than being a connector.
Oh, so you are saying, can you hack disruption index by citing earlier and smaller work?
Yes.
Like how people hack citation by citing recent big work.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's a very interesting question. But so here's the consequence. We see there are many dimensions from here, but yeah, here's the landscape of science. Science is advanced by two forces, right? Convention and novelty. Or this also like, let's be more specific. This also applies to every single scholar, to every single paper, right? To make your paper be accepted by a journal, a decent journal, you need to make the relevance. Sometimes we probably all experience, we are forced to make the relevance, to cite some suggestive reference. So it's really about making the relevance and adding the novelty. One of our new work under review at the Journal of Informatics relate this disruption to a previously well-established novelty metrics by Brian Wuji's team called atypicality in many works. So the question we ask here is how a new science is created, and to your version, can we hack the disruption index? Can we design it to be high, right? Can we grow a new direction of science? Well, of course you can do that, but the risk here is, what we learned is that how does a new direction in science create, or how does a new disruption index paper emerge, and how does the input as a reference relate to this consequence? One of the findings we discover is that you need to cite upon a group of work that's not only less popular earlier, but relate to each other, right? So how to understand this? One way is to understand is, do you choose to dive in a topic of consensus or a topic of lack of consensus? So a topic of consensus can be described in the way that not just the popularity of the paper itself, but also the co-citation of this important reference, right? Everyone try to do work on that topic in that way, has to cite this kind of package of knowledge bases. Now, if you try to do that, there's very low chance you can disrupt, but there's a high chance your paper get accepted because you are part of the conversation of the consensus that is forming. Versus you really take the risk to cite earlier work, cite smaller work, cite even irrelevant work. One of the examples we found is the 1950 paper by Watson and Crick on the discovery of DNA, right? To have that, to write a paper like that, you have to prove very different things together. And you also have a high risk of immediately get rejected. So long story short, to your question, I would say, yes, there's something you can do, but it's always a cost function. That's a huge risk in terms of the when it's judged in the relevance dimension. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Klaus. Ling, one more question. I think then we might close. Paul Leipziger, you had a question about falsehoods and their spread and changing over time.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can.
Great. So there's a work by Sinanarao from MIT Sloan School, which is fairly recent, looked at the spread of falsehoods on Twitter. And in his own words, we found one of the most concerning results in his scientific career, which was that falsehoods spread wider and faster than truths. And I was wondering whether that could be measured in the scientific literature in some way, and whether the process of peer review mitigated against that.
Thanks, Paul. I'll just repeat, Ling. So the problem of a finding from Sinan Aral finds that falsehoods move further and faster than truth on Twitter.
Yes.
And if scientific peer review mitigates that, or like, do we have a control on that? We probably only have a short amount of time, but that's the question.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I like to maybe we should have more future sections to think together. These are fascinating questions addressing the ongoing concerns in science and in broader context, right? One thing I could share is that there has been many papers share the same finding that peer review. So the quick question here is, let me rephrase it. What is the contribution of peer review? Why we are still using peer review? What does it do in our science?
Slow down science in economics.
Yeah, right. So people find many limitations of peer review. Like if you review things from people from the same field, you are more like critical and this and that, which are not surprising, that's humanity. But one thing that peer review help us is it prevents us from making huge mistakes. It does not move things forward. It prevents things from falling too much downward, right? So that's this is understandable if you think about one of the gold standards in software development. It's called Lewis, if I remember, it's called Lewis law. It's the version is, I remember, is with enough eyeballs, all errors are shared, all bugs are shared, right? So it's more, peer review is so frequently used in programming because you have peer reviewing each other's codes. And what does it? How does it help? Well, it's more like a quality control. You are not going to write very stupid bugs if you have each other review each other. So I will assume the same mechanism works in science and perhaps in the broader context of knowledge production. That if we have peer review, we'll prevent each other saying very stupid things. But peer review itself, it's not a place where excellent and crazy good idea happens. It probably kills these kind of ideas if we have peer review before the creation of ideas. Yeah.
I think Simon just had a little technical difficulty, so he had to leave the meeting. So he sends his apologies, and thank you everyone for joining us today, and thank you, Ling, for that very fascinating talk. I think we all had a really nice eye-opener into the work that we are really doing. Just before everybody leaves, I just want to let you know that we're taking a approximately 1 month break, and then we'll be back in August with Melissa Dell on the 3rd of August. So look forward to seeing you all in August. Yeah, so I mean, we can all thank Ling for his time and for the wonderful talk that he gave us. Thank you, Ling.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Then see you all soon. Ling, so once the recording is up on the website, I can send you the link to that. Just for your reference, you can have it in. And I think there was a couple of questions on the chat that I can also send you.